que si piensa en algo, pone el dedo, algo que la piense, porque no es fácil. No es fácil estar aquí y ya no vuelves para atrás.
In 2012, a video went viral showing the horrific fate of Felix Gómez Garcia and his nephew Barnabas Gómez Castro. Now, that gruesome footage, which captured their brutal executions and last words, was meant to send a warning to anyone who tried to mess with the Sinaloa cartel. Here are 6 cartel victims and their disturbing last messages. September 27th, 2020, one of the most horrific torture videos ever started circulating online. The video would catch a cartel leader with the nickname Ghost Rider who was in a situation where he would regret having that nickname. Now, the war between the CJNG and the United Cartel had plunged the region into a nightmare of bloodshed and terror. The battle for control of El Aguaje, Mexico, had unleashed a wave of brutality. The CJNG, which is a ruthless and powerful organization known for their fierce tactics and relentless pursuit of dominance, who are led by El Mencho, would spread like a plague, corrupting and destroying everything in its path. Their opponents, the United Cartel or Los Unidos, are a formidable force in their own right. This is an alliance of several smaller cartels, all united under the shared goal of taking down the CJNG. In this united cartel lurks a man of pure evil known as Ghost Rider, a name striking fear into the hearts of even the most hardened men. Now, this ruthless hitman had carved a path of gore and madness, leaving behind a trail of victims who had suffered fates worse than death. You see, in September 2020, El Aguaje, which was once a peaceful town, had become a battleground, just stained with the blood of innocents and corrupt alike. Now, Ghost Rider is a key general for Los Unidos, embodying the true essence of terror. In this one particularly gruesome incident, he was captured on camera executing a father and son, and the sheer brutality of that act defied all sense of humanity. They were subjected to unspeakable torture, their screams echoing through the night before finally being hacked to pieces. But that wasn't enough, because Ghost Rider, with a twisted smile on his face, would set the son's body ablaze, laughing in amusement as the sickening smell of burning flesh filled the air. His depravity knew no bounds. He would target those who dared to uphold the law as well. In this one act of pure evil, he kidnapped a cop. A man swore to protect the people, right? Ghost Rider, with a sadistic gleam in his eye, would slowly and methodically butcher this officer limb by limb, relishing in the agony and suffering he inflicted. Little did he know that someday he would find himself in that same predicament like his victims. You see, later that month, the CJNG had finally captured Mr. Ghost Rider. In this remote ranch, Ghost Rider's captors prepared their sinister ritual. The hitman, once a feared figure, now lay broken and battered, showing the evidence of torture even before the recording started. This was just the beginning, and his last words would prove just how unimaginable the suffering he passed through was. So with methodical precision, his captors began their work, really taking their time on this one. It is believed they injected him with adrenaline, ensuring he'll stay awake throughout this whole time. This is how you inflict the worst pain possible. Now, throughout the video, he's subjected to unspeakable horrors. They cut off his limbs, one by one, watching with glee as he writhed in agony. Then, they moved to the main event. His captors poured rubbing alcohol on his exposed flesh and just ignited it, turning his face into a burning torch. And you could hear him saying that it smells like a barbecue. But even in this broken state, Ghost Rider still showed a lot of strength, because it's probably the adrenaline they pumped into him, but he glared up at his captors with what remained in his eyes, and that just infuriated them even more. It fueled their desire to break him completely. So after enduring days of pain and torture, his body began to give in. His once powerful frame was now little more than a shell, held together by a sheer force of will. Now his captors, sensing that the end was near, prepared their final act of cruelty. As if his face wasn't burned enough, the whole burning process was repeated yet again. They turned him into a human torch, and his body could be seen convulsing as the flames devoured him. Some of the fire dropped on his groin, and that began to burn too. At this point, the flesh on his face was literally melting off. In his final moments, Ghost Rider begged for death to come, as you could hear him praying in Spanish. Unfortunately, no one really answered those prayers, as he suffered for a lot longer. One of his captors even remarked how now he looked like the Ghost Rider from the movie, a skull lit up in flames. Ghost Rider stayed in this state for what seemed like an eternity, until he did finally give up. What was left of him was unrecognizable, burnt to a crisp, features all distorted. So after the death of Ghost Rider, the war between the CJNG and Los Capitos raged on. soon, many more were killed, and El Aguaje witnessed more massacres. On July 15, 2021, Maria Fernanda Garcia disappeared from her home in Toluca, Mexico, without a trace. Now, little did her family know that their worst fears would soon be realized, as a video would soon emerge, showing the horrific death of Maria, and was surrounded by a family that loved and cared for her. But she lived in a world where criminals reigned supreme, and it was only a matter of time before her path would cross with that of the fearful world of the notorious drug cartels in her town. On July 15, 2021, Maria disappeared from home. However, she was last seen with a man who was only identified by his face, and his picture was attached to the police missing persons notice. Unfortunately, to this day, the police have this picture, but no actionable information on him, like a name and address. So, being aware of the possible danger their daughter could be in, her family had reported her missing to the police. Now, how could they have known that their beloved daughter was already dead, her life taken in the most brutal and unthinkable manner? Unknown to her parents, their daughter was mingling with ruthless and infamous Familia Michoacana cartel members, and the clock was ticking before the inevitable happened. You see, the cartel, known for their bloodthirstiness, had their eyes on Maria, and their reach extended further than anyone could have imagined. Maria, innocent and naive, had no idea that her actions would lead her down this path of no return. Now, all she was really doing was running little errands for him, but she probably didn't comprehend how much danger she was actually getting into. So a few days after her disappearance, a chilling and gruesome video surfaced online, and it quickly became clear that Maria had been kidnapped by the cartel and she was never coming back. Now, the video, too graphic and disturbing to describe in detail, showed a terrified Maria, her eyes wide with fear and her hands tied behind her back. One man pointed a gun at her head, while another casually stroked her cheek with a knife in a playful way. The video at first looked like a hoax, as the men in the video didn't show much intention of doing anything sinister. However, this only made the fate of Maria worse, as you'll soon discover. The interrogation began, and the masked man, with his voice heavily distorted, demanded to know her name. Maria, her voice shaking, replied, "Maria Fernanda Garcia Alvarez." The questions continued, and it became clear that they believed Maria was involved with their rivals. They wanted information, and they were willing to do whatever to get it. Now, later it would be revealed that she had been relating information about members of the La Familia Michoacana cartel to some other men who were suspected to be rival cartel members. So Maria, scared out of her wits, provided the name Fernando Mendoza as the person who had sent her to get the information. But despite obtaining that crucial detail, the interrogator continued his questions. In a state of pure terror, she could only repeat the same name, her voice becoming fainter. Shortly after, the interrogation ended with a bone-chilling statement from the masked man saying, "Now, you see if you want to play with us." And then, the unthinkable happened. The man with the knife suddenly started cutting Maria's throat. Well, at least that's what he intended to do when it suddenly seemed he was having some difficulty with the task. A look of surprise could be seen briefly on Maria's face. Even she was surprised that he was having difficulties getting the job done. It was later revealed that the knife he was using was blunt. However, instead of getting a sharper knife, he proceeded to apply more pressure. Now blood was beginning to spill. Yet Maria was very much alive, trying to resist this. It was obvious that the blade must have only cut into her throat a little bit at a time, because she was still able to scream and plead. After realizing the knife was too blunt, the man switched to stabbing. This was where the whole execution became bloody. The entire process had to be so painful and agonizing for Maria, and it would just drag on until she eventually died. Now, in Mexico, it's common for authorities not to take serious action on executions like this. It was therefore no surprise that the investigation into her murder was unsuccessful due to the lack of cooperation and seriousness, which really left the family no choice but to take matters into their own hands. They hired private detectives, determined to find justice for their daughter, and it's through their tireless efforts that a breakthrough was made. Maria's cell was traced to a house in Zapopan, and to everyone's shock, it belonged to someone she knew. This person, whose identity remains hidden, was arrested and charged with Maria's murder. However, the suspect denies any involvement, claiming he had simply found her body in a freezer. Now, while the story didn't add up, it was the only information they could get out of him. The police have also been tight-lipped about this case and offering very little in the way of comfort. They released only scant details about the investigation and haven't really disclosed any information on Maria's killers, or even the motive behind why she was targeted. Now, this lack of information only adds to the fear and uncertainty in this community, which leaves everyone wondering if they could be next. And just as you might have thought, La Familia Michoacana continues their reign of terror in Maria's hometown of Toluca.
I made a conscious decision, in fact I vocalized it to some of the members, that when I got out I was going to make sure I track him down and take care of him.
December 17, 1972, Rodolfo Alvarado, better known as Cheyenne, was stabbed several times in a California prison. Now, the Mexican Mafia didn't take his death lightly, as they tracked down his killer in revenge. Alvarado wasn't the kind of man anyone would want to mess with. He was one of the key leaders of the Mexican Mafia, also known as La M. At just 19, Cheyenne proved how vicious he was when he was sent to prison. Here, a 300-pound inmate would walk up to him, kiss him, and it was a sign of disrespect, and Cheyenne wasn't going to take that disrespect from anyone. So without missing a beat, he drew out a knife and stabbed this inmate to death. That single act sent shivers down everyone's spine, and they instantly knew not to mess with him anymore. So when Cheyenne got killed in 1972, it was a shock to every member of that mafia. It had never happened that a top-ranking member of La M would be killed in this prison. They own this prison and call the shots. How could something like this happen? Well, it was because a new group was on the rise, and that group was known as Nuestra Familia, or the NF, and it was Danny Woodsy Reyes, a member of the NF that took responsibility for the death of Cheyenne. However, what he didn't know was that a more ruthless member of La M was listening to that, and that man was Mundo Mendoza, the most vicious killer in the Mexican Mafia at that time. When Mundo heard Reyes bragging about killing Cheyenne, he was incarcerated at the time, but he swore revenge once he got out of prison. For Mundo, getting Woodsy Reyes was a piece of cake. As fate would have it, Reyes' brother Ronald had eyes on a lady called Ciclona. And guess who Ciclona's brother was? It was Cheyenne, the same person Woodsy had murdered in prison. So at the time, Mundo was uncertain whether or not Ronald was deeply involved in Cheyenne's death, even though he was also a drug dealer. So Ronald probably didn't know his own brother was responsible for killing the brother of the woman he was interested in. But that wasn't going to spare him from the coming judgment of La M. The Reyes brothers were staying in Bakersfield, California at the time, and Ciclona lived there too. So she was confident she could get Mundo access into the house of the Reyes brothers. You see, Ciclona conspired with Mundo after she learned that one of the Reyeses was responsible for the death of her brother. So on October 9, 1975, Mundo Mendoza and another member of La M, known as Sailor, stalked out the Reyes brothers' home to determine the right time to strike. When they got the signal from Ciclona, the men positioned themselves out of sight beside the door while she knocked. Ronald, unaware of the danger that was lurking in the corner, opened that door for her, thinking it was his lucky day, and when she stepped in, Sailor followed her into the house. It was at this point that Sailor and Mendoza discovered that they had made a mistake, as the person they came for, Danny Reyes, wasn't home. Unfortunately, the men killed Ronald with a shot to the head, and then waited patiently for Danny to return. Some hours later, Danny drives up to the front yard and walks into an ambush without any clue. The time had come for him to pay for his crime, 12 years after killing Cheyenne. After stepping into the house, Reyes quickly realized he had walked right into the hands of his arch enemies. He asks for his brother, to which Mendoza responds that he'd be seeing him soon. Mendoza and Sailor opened fire on Danny, and he falls to the ground, but he's still alive. Before Mendoza got more shots off at him, Danny said his last words.
Ground, and he was dying. I could barely hear his voice, very weak. He said it was fading. He said, "Don't shoot me anymore, I'm dying."
Although Mundo and Sailor were later arrested by police for the murder of the Reyes brothers, they surprisingly got away without being sentenced. In fact, Mundo Mendoza himself revealed Woodsy Reyes' last words in an interview that unveiled the inner workings and secrets of the Mexican Mafia. 2017, Carlos Enrique Sanchez, better yet known as Elcholo, dumped the CJ&G cartel for another cartel. That move would cost him dearly. In his last moments would be one of the most chilling executions on record. Now, Elcholo was a key member of the New Generation Cartel, or the CJ&G, and he was the right-hand man to the merciless El Mencho, and was personally involved in many brutal executions of rivals and members who fell out of line. However, despite his top position, Elcholo felt he deserved more. He thought himself equal to the boss and wanted more power. His ambitions would lead him to establish his own cartel. And interestingly, Elcholo wasn't alone on this mission. With him was another CJ&G lieutenant, Eric Valencia Salazar, also known as L85. Now, L85, who had been in prison since 2012, had just regained his freedom, and he felt betrayed by the CJ&G. He decided he wasn't going back to that cartel and teamed up with Elcholo, and together they left the CJ&G altogether. In 2018, Elcholo and L85 formed the Nueva Plaza Cartel, and their primary goal was to compete with El Mencho and maybe eliminate him. Now, while they knew this was a dangerous ambition, they concluded it was the game cartels play. To them, death was to be embraced. However, Elcholo will soon regret underestimating El Mencho and learn that all men can be broken. As a former top-ranking member of the CJ&G, Cholo gave him a good run for their money. Now, the two cartels were always involved in a battle, but for El Mencho, this was like a Tuesday. As the conflict raged on, the body count rose, and the city of Guadalajara became a war zone. The rivalry between CJ&G and La Nueva Plaza bathed the land in blood, with disappearances and deaths becoming a horrifying norm. The year 2018 would mark a descent into further madness, as the Jalisco state becomes a black hole of misery, accounting for over 20% of all disappearances in Mexico. But what really angered the CJ&G was when the Nueva Plaza cartel assassinated Marcos Hernandez, a financial pillar of the CJ&G. With this, they got the attention of El Mencho, and he vowed to make the end of Elcholo a very miserable one. However, the plan to hunt down Elcholo wouldn't go as planned at first. The hit squad El Mencho assembled for this task would instead be eliminated by the Nueva Plaza cartel. It was so bad for the CJ&G that the Nueva Plaza were to be believed to be the new criminal group that could take down the CJ&G, despite being the second largest and most powerful cartel. Unfortunately for Elcholo, his luck would soon run out in this warfare. On March 18th, 2021, a video no one expected emerged. Right there was Elcholo, the boss of the Nueva Plaza cartel, now a captive surrounded by several heavily armed men in ski masks.
Mi nombre es Carlos Enrique Sánchez Martínez, alias Elcholo, originario de Guadalajara, Jalisco.
This video in Spanish with Mexican music playing in the background is unexpectedly calm. Elcholo didn't appear to be in any distress as he calmly sent a last message out to members of his cartel, warning them not to follow his path. In his statement, he confessed to creating an alignment with several key leaders of the CJ&G, including lieutenants known as LO2 and LO3. Their mission was to unite to bring down the boss. He also confessed to creating chaos in Guadalajara and involving the police in order to make the entire situation even more difficult to resolve. In other words, Elcholo wanted to take over the city, and the best way he thought he could achieve that was through terror. At the end of his confessions, he gave a word of advice to his followers. You guys that still support me, stop doing it and dedicate to your family. Look how I ended. Those were his last words. On the same day his video was posted online, his dismembered body was discovered on a bench in Arden Hidalgo, a park near the city hall of Tlaquepaque. A message was stuck to that plastic bag with two knives, reading, "The traitor, Elcholo." So aside from the message that identified the body of Elcholo, his family had to be called in for a second opinion. After an autopsy, the horrifying details of how he died were revealed. First, Elcholo was mercilessly beaten before some of his toes were cut off. The beating had also broken some of his ribs, but this is all child reference play to the horror that's coming up. I guess the goriest aspect would have been when his tongue got pulled out. It's assumed that a vacuum or something similar was used to suck the tongue out in one piece. After the torture, he was shot 3 times in the head. Elcholo's death should have been the conclusion to this gruesome tale, but it was merely just another chapter in this never-ending cycle of violence. Now, the question of which cartel was in power after Elcholo's death only served to fuel the fire, with the CJ&G now seeking to reclaim their dominance. His execution methods, bearing the telltale signs of unimaginable pain, sent a chilling message to all who dared to defy the cartels. And so, the cartel wars continued on in Guadalajara, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake.
What do you know about Veracruz Ranch? And Kiki answers, I know that Caro Quintero is bringing in tons of cocaine to that ranch.
Go back to 1985. U.S.-Mexican DEA agent Kiki Camarena reveals a deadly secret about the CIA and the Guadalajara cartel. Now, this act eventually got him kidnapped and subjected to gruesome torture that would freak anybody out. In the summer of 1980, Enrique Kiki Camarena Salazar would take up his post in Guadalajara as an investigator into the marijuana plantations in the area. However, due to restrictions on solo flights and covert operations, DEA in Mexico focused on building a network of informants, a challenging task made even more dangerous as the risks associated with snitching increased. Nevertheless, Camarena demonstrated exceptional skill in developing and working with these sources. In 1982, Camarena's collaboration with an informant nicknamed Miguel Sanchez led to a groundbreaking discovery. Miguel had befriended the manager of a secret plantation, who revealed its location near the tiny town of Vanegas. This tip led Camarena to suspect that the cartel member Juan Jose Esparragoza Moreno was behind this operation. Fast forward to August 1982. Camarena and Miguel finally tracked down this plantation. To confirm suspicions, Camarena takes 2 solo flights over this area, even though solo flights had been banned, right? And satisfied with what he saw, he alerts the Mexican authorities. By September, the authorities swoop in and raid the plantation. What they found was astonishing. A massive operation spanning over 200 acres that employed hundreds of workers. The DEA estimated that the raid destroyed a staggering amount of marijuana, making it the largest bust of its kind at the time. Now, in addition to that, Kiki's work with informants also led to the event that took place in 1984. However, it was this operation that sealed his fate with the Guadalajara cartel. Acting on information from the Drug Enforcement Administration, 450 Mexican soldiers backed by choppers destroyed a 1,000-hectare marijuana plantation in Allende, Chihuahua, known as Rancho Búfalo. Now, this plantation had an estimated annual production of $8 billion, and it was way larger than the previous plantation Camarena discovered. February 7, 1985, Special Agent Enrique Kiki Camarena would leave the American consulate, unaware that deadly forces are lurking nearby. As he steps towards his car, a van pops out of nowhere, and without warning, Camarena is overpowered and thrown inside the van. The destruction of the Rancho Búfalo plantation was one of the major reasons the cartel targeted him, because they suspect that he was responsible for leaking that information to the DEA. So investigations would later show that Camarena was taken to a house at 881 Lope de Vega in Guadalajara, a property owned by cartel boss Rafael Caro Quintero. Anyone in the city of Guadalajara knows that Caro Quintero is someone to be feared, as he's one of the earliest cartel bosses in Mexico. This guy is considered a godfather to many cartel lords that later emerged. Quintero is not only responsible for establishing the Guadalajara cartel. In fact, it was from his organization that key leaders of the Sinaloa cartel, the Tijuana cartel, and the Juarez cartel learned their trade. So now this is the man who was powerful and untouchable in Mexico. Between February 7th to February 9th of 1985, Camarena suffered unending torture from the cartel to the extent that the cartel had to employ a doctor on standby to keep him alive. Camarena was severely beaten, leaving him with many broken bones. Now, according According to Special Agent Hector Bereyes, who worked on the case, what put Camarena in trouble was when he revealed that he knew Caro Quintero was moving cocaine for the CIA, and that confession also became the last words Camarena ever uttered. March 5, 1985, Camarena's body was found wrapped in plastic in a rural area outside the small town of La Angostura in the state of Michoacán. His skull was found punctured by a piece of rebar with several broken ribs. Now, they arrested 3 leaders out of the Guadalajara drug cartel, including Rafael Caro Quintero, for Camarena's murder. The U.S. investigation into the incident would lead to 10 more trials in L.A. for other Mexican nationals involved in this murder. But the most interesting part of Camarena's case was when various individuals, including journalists, historians, former DEA and CIA agents, as well as Mexican police officers, started making claims that suggested a potential connection between the CIA and Camarena's death, alleging that Camarena uncovered CIA involvement in narcotics trafficking during the Cold War era. However, the CIA has denied these allegations.
¿Tu nombre?
Eric Gámez García. Soy originario de Cubiri de la Loma.
June 2011, Barnabas Garcia was arrested for drug charges in the U.S. before posting bail for $20,000. Little did he know that his arrest and bail would bring him even more trouble than he encountered behind bars. Now, Barnabas Gámez Garcia and his uncle, Felix Gámez Castro, were reportedly involved with the Sinaloa cartel. Their involvement allegedly included drug transportation and other logistical support for the cartel's operations. Problem was, they weren't well paid. You'd assume that men working for these guys would get paid lots of money, right? Because why would anybody risk prison time or their lives to move tons of drugs for meager pay? But the ugly truth is that, yeah, most people that work for these cartels don't get paid a lot. Garcia and his uncle got paid about 300 pesos, which was like 21 bucks at the time. Along the line, they would get tempted to take some money for themselves. By June 17, 2011, Garcia was arrested in Phoenix, Arizona, on charges of distributing and transporting illicit drugs, and at that time, he identified himself as Paulino Gomez Garcia. After his arrest, bail was set at $20,000, which he managed to pay, securing his release. Now, this makes us wonder how he could afford that amount of money despite the low wages he got from the cartel, but anyways, unfortunately for him, the cartel was also thinking the same thing. And of course, Garcia and his uncle were later captured to explain how they came about that kind of money. But that's not all. The cartel also suspected that Garcia might have given information to the police during his detention. In 2012, a video was released after Garcia and Castro were captured. In this video, we see him sitting shirtless against a wall, surrounded by masked men armed with rifles. The men go on to interrogate him briefly, forcing him to confess their roles in the cartel and their betrayals by stealing from the organization. As the video goes on, Felix was already certain they'd be killed, and he gave his last message, roughly translating to, "Think next time you decide to give the finger. Think about it very carefully, because it's not easy being here, and you never return back. With these people, you don't play around. The people of El Chapo are not how they say they are," he said with a low voice. After the interrogation, the masked men used a chainsaw to decapitate Felix Gámez Garcia, a method obviously chosen for its sheer brutality, offering its psychological impact to anybody who watches this. And as for Barnabas Gámez Castro, he was killed with a knife, which was a slower and equally gruesome way to die. What's even more disturbing here is how both men reacted to this fate. They had totally accepted they were gonna die, and made no effort to resist or even beg in any way. Now, it is assumed that they pumped Garcia and Castro full of drugs before this execution, as there was no way their natural instincts wouldn't have kicked in. In fact, as the chainsaw worked its way through the neck of Garcia's uncle, the blade accidentally cut his arm, and surprisingly, Garcia didn't even flinch. To this day, however, it's still unclear whether or not Garcia actually used the drug money he was supposed to deliver to the cartel to post bail, or if he really did leak cartel information to U.S. authorities when he was apprehended.